Honestly, Mum, just let Mark handle the ordering. You know how you get with numbers these days. The words came from my own daughter, Sarah. She stood in the doorway of the little back office of Ellie's hardware, the one my Frank built for me with his own hands. The air smelled of sawdust and old paper, a scent that had been my comfort for 40 years. The old fluorescent light above my desk hummed a steady, familiar tune. Sarah didn't see any of that. She just saw an old woman who couldn't handle numbers. I looked down at the invoice in my hand. The numbers were perfectly clear. I could have told her that our profit margin on galvanized screws was up 3% this quarter. I could have reminded her that I balanced these books every single night for 4 decades, even when her father was sick, but I just folded the paper and set it on the desk. "Of course, dear," I said. My voice was calm, but a cold knot was tightening in my stomach. It was the legacy of the store, Frank's legacy, that was at stake, and my own dignity. The next day, Mark came in smelling of expensive cologne that didn't belong in a hardware store. He was my son-in-law, and he had ideas. He decided our front display of best-selling garden tools needed a refresh. I watched from behind the counter as he moved the sturdy trowels and pruning shears, the things our regulars came in for every week, to a dusty shelf in the back. In their place, he put a pyramid of brightly coloured plastic watering cans from China. Mrs. Gable, who had been buying her tomato cages from us since 1988, came in. "Ellie," she said, squinting at the display, "where on earth are the good shears?" Before I could answer, Mark stepped forward with a big smile. "Right this way, sweetie," he said, patting my shoulder. "Let me help you find what you're looking for." He winked at Mrs. Gable. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. Later that evening, long after Mark and Sarah had gone home to their perfect life, I stayed behind. The bell over the door was silent. I moved every single one of those plastic watering cans to the clearance bin. Then, I put the good tools back where they belonged, right at the front of the store. The familiar weight of the steel in my hands felt like coming home. The phone rang on Tuesday morning. It was Mr. Henderson from the bank. His voice was polite, but firm. "Eleanor, I'm just calling to confirm a large order placed on the business account for $5,000 worth of composite decking." My hand tightened on the old black receiver. We didn't stock composite decking. It was a special order item, and we hadn't had a request in months. "I didn't authorize that, Bill," I said, my own heart thumping a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. "Well," he said, clearing his throat. "The order was placed by a Mark Peterson. He said he was the new manager." A flicker of real fear, cold and sharp, went through me. This wasn't about watering cans anymore. This was about my money, my control. I told Mr. Henderson to cancel the order immediately. An hour later, my cell phone buzzed. It was Sarah. "Mum, I was just talking to Mark. He's a little worried about you. Are you feeling all right? He said you seem to be getting forgetful." That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the one Frank and I bought at a yard sale when we were first married. I spread out my papers under the warm yellow light. My social security statement, the store's weekly earnings report, my pension details. The numbers were all there, clear as day. I was not forgetful. I opened a drawer to find a pen, and my fingers brushed against a thick envelope. Inside were old photos. There was one of Frank and me, young and smiling, breaking ground on the empty lot that would become our store. He was holding the shovel, but my hand was on top of his. We built it together. The memory was like a steel rod straightening my spine. Sunday dinner was at Sarah's house. The roast was dry, but I didn't say anything. Mark carved it, making a big show of it. "You know," he said, holding the carving knife in the air. We should really think about rebranding. Mark's Hardware has a nice ring to it, don't you think? He laughed, like it was a big joke. Sarah gave a weak smile. Nobody else said a word. But the silence in the room was louder than any laugh. On Monday, I went out to the parking lot to check the mail. It was a chilly afternoon, and the grey sky promised snow. Mark's new SUV was parked near the road, and he was inside, talking on his phone. I saw his mouth moving, his hands gesturing. As I got closer to the mailbox, I could hear his voice through the glass. "No, it's a gold mine," he was saying. "We just need to leverage the old asset, liquidate the inventory, and pivot. The real estate alone is worth a fortune." The old asset. He was talking about my store, my life, my husband's dream. The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. I fumbled with the key to the mailbox, my fingers suddenly numb. I grabbed the stack of mail and turned back. Mark saw me and ended his call quickly. He rolled down the window. "Everything okay, Ellie?" he asked, his voice full of false concern. "Just fine," I said, forcing a smile. "Just checking the mail." I held up a handful of bills and flyers as proof. He nodded, satisfied, and rolled the window back up. I walked back into the store, the cold metal of the letters chilling my hand. He saw my life's work as a stepping stone, and he had no idea I'd just seen the whole path. My daughter Sarah stopped by the store that Tuesday. The air in the little office still smelled faintly of sawdust and coffee, the way it always had. She didn't look at the sales reports on my desk. Instead, she perched on the edge of the visitor's chair, twisting the strap of her purse. "Mom," she began, her voice a little too bright. "Mark and I were talking. You've been working so hard for so long. We think you should take a long vacation. Maybe that Alaskan cruise you always talked about." I looked at her, my daughter, and saw a stranger. "A cruise?" "Yes. You've earned a rest, Mum. Let us handle things here for a few weeks." The words were kind, but the meaning was cold and sharp. Get out of the way. I just nodded slowly. After she left, the hum of the old computer filled the silence. Her perfume lingered in the air, sweet and suffocating. My eyes landed on the computer screen. There was a new folder on the desktop, one I hadn't made. It was labeled simply Business Plan. My hand trembled just a little as I moved the mouse. I clicked on the folder. It opened. There was one file inside. I clicked again. It wasn't a plan to improve the hardware store. It was a plan to bleed it dry. Mark's name was all over it. He detailed how he would absorb the store's assets, liquidate our best-selling inventory, and use the cash to fund some kind of tech company. He called Frank's life work the seed asset. The betrayal was a physical thing, a sharp pain behind my ribs. He wasn't just trying to take over. He was planning to gut my husband's legacy and sell it for parts. I read the whole thing, every last word. Then I closed the document. I moved the mouse to the recent files history and cleared it. I shut down the computer. I stood up, smoothed my sweater, and walked out into the store. My face was calm. Anyone looking would have thought I was just thinking about what to make for dinner. But inside my chest, my heart was beating like a war drum. The next Sunday was coffee morning after church service. The basement smelled of stale coffee and Martha's famous lemon pound cake. The ladies were all talking about their grandchildren and their gardens. I stirred my coffee, the spoon making a small clinking sound against the ceramic mug. "My son-in-law, bless his heart," Martha said, patting my arm. "He came over and fixed my leaky faucet yesterday without me even asking. He's just so helpful." I smiled at her. It was a thin, brittle thing, but it was the best I could do. "That's wonderful, Martha," I said. The secret of Mark's business plan felt like a cold, heavy stone in my stomach. I looked around at the smiling faces, the comfortable chatter, and I realized something with a terrible clarity. I was completely and utterly alone in this. Mark brought a young man into the store on Wednesday. "Ellie, this is Chad," he announced, clapping him on the back. "He's a consultant. He's going to help us streamline our inventory." Chad looked about 25. He smelled strongly of some spicy cologne and wore shoes that squeaked on the old concrete floor. He walked around with a clipboard, making notes. Then he came into the office and sat in the chair Sarah had used. "So, Ellie," he said, leaning forward like he was sharing a big secret. "Let's talk about profit margins. It's the difference between what you buy a product for and what you sell it for." I looked at this boy, explaining the most basic part of my own business to me, a business I had built from nothing with my own two hands. I just nodded. I smiled. I stood up and walked to the little coffee pot in the corner. "Can I get you a cup of coffee, Chad?" I asked. He said yes, and I poured it for him, my hand perfectly steady. The week before Christmas, the phone rang while I was peeling potatoes at my kitchen sink. It was Sarah. I could hear Christmas carols playing in the background on her end. She was talking a mile a minute about the big dinner she was hosting. "And everyone's coming. The cousins from out of state, Aunt Carol, everyone," she chirped. "It's going to be so special." "That sounds lovely, dear," I said, my voice even. "Oh, and Mom," she added, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Mark has a really special announcement for the whole family. It's a surprise." The water ran over my hands, cold and clear. I knew exactly what the surprise was. The dread that had been sitting in my stomach for weeks didn't disappear. It hardened into something else. Something cold and quiet and strong. The day after Sarah's phone call, I didn't go to the store. I drove my old Buick downtown, the engine humming a steady, reliable tune. The county records office smelled of old paper and dust, a scent I've always found comforting. I asked the clerk for the incorporation file for Ellie's hardware from 40 years ago. She brought out a thin manila folder, the papers inside brittle at the edges. There it was, in my late husband Frank's clean, architectural handwriting, and there was my signature. Eleanor Vance, President. Not co-owner, not manager, President. My name, my authority. The clerk's stamp came down with a heavy, satisfying thud on the copies I requested. I paid the small fee in cash and slid the warm papers into my handbag. I walked out into the cold December air, clutching my purse like it held the crown jewels. It felt like it did. For the first time in months, the knot in my stomach loosened just a little. I had proof of who I was. I had made 3 certified copies, just in case. That afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table, the certified copies spread out before me. The scent of leftover coffee hung in the air. I picked up the phone, my fingers tracing the cool plastic of the receiver before I dialed. I hadn't spoken to Carol in almost a year. We were college roommates, thick as thieves, but life had sent her to a big city law firm and me to a small-town hardware store. "Ellie, is that you?" Her voice was the same, sharp and warm all at once. "It's me, Carol," I said. In a calm, steady voice, I told her everything. I told her about Mark calling me sweetie and Sarah asking if I was getting forgetful. I told her about the business plan I found on the computer. I just laid the facts out, one after another, like stacking cans on a shelf. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. All I could hear was the faint buzz of the connection and the slow, heavy tick of the grandfather clock in my hall. Just when I thought she hadn't heard me, Carol's voice came through, clear and strong. "Ellie," she said, "you have more power than you think. Let's talk tomorrow." We met for lunch at the Oak Room, a quiet place with linen tablecloths and heavy silverware. Carol looked wonderful, her silver hair cut in a sharp, stylish bob. She ordered a salad. I ordered the pot roast. I needed something solid. "He has no legal claim, Ellie." "None," she said, after I laid out the copies on the table between us. "The business is in your name, and your name alone. Frank made sure of that. He was a smart man." I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. He always said he wanted me to be safe. "Well, you are," Carol said, her eyes meeting mine. "But being safe isn't the same as being respected." She took a sip of her iced tea. "I think you need to find out exactly what you're sitting on. Get a full, independent business valuation, immediately and quietly." The idea of selling had always felt like a betrayal to Frank's memory, but listening to Carol, it started to feel different. It felt like a key. I picked up my fork and looked at my friend, the woman who had known me since I was 18. "You know," I said, my voice clearer than it had been in years, "a woman isn't truly old until her history is more important than her future." Carol gave me a name, Mr. Chen, a commercial real estate agent known for his professionalism and, more importantly, his discretion. His voice on the phone was low and calm. It soothed the nervous flutter in my chest. "I understand completely, Mrs. Vance," he said. "I can be in your area this evening. Would it be possible for me to stop by after you close? I can pose as a customer who forgot something, if you like." "That would be perfect," I said. 7 o'clock? That evening, I locked the front door at 6 on the dot, just like always. But instead of going home, I stayed. I walked the aisles, the familiar smell of sawdust and metal polish filling my lungs. This store was my life's work. It was my home. The idea of a stranger putting a price on it made me feel a little sick, but the thought of Mark gutting it for parts made me feel even sicker. This wasn't about giving up. It was about taking control. Mr. Chen arrived exactly at 7. He was a trim man in a grey suit, his shoes squeaking softly on the polished concrete floor. He didn't say much. He just walked, his sharp eyes taking in everything: the state of the roof, the layout of the plumbing aisle, the width of the loading dock out back. He ran a hand along the sturdy oak countertop Frank had built himself. He gave a quiet nod of approval. "You have a very solid property here, Mrs. Vance. Very well maintained." He pulled out a small notepad. "And with the new zoning changes on this side of town, the land alone is worth considerably more than you might imagine." He handed me his card as we walked to the front door. "I'll have a preliminary number for you by the end of the week." I felt a dizzying rush of hope. As I turned to lock the door behind him, a pair of bright headlights swept across the front windows, blinding me for a second. A familiar engine rumbled to a stop. It was Mark's truck, pulling into the empty parking lot. I stepped out onto the loading dock, the cool night air a relief after the stuffy office. I locked the heavy steel door behind me just as headlights swept across the gravel lot. Mark's SUV. My heart gave a single, hard thump against my ribs. I forced a calm smile as he got out of the car. "Working late?" I asked, my voice steady. "Just wanted to check the new security camera feed from home," he said, his eyes flicking from me to Mr. Chen's retreating car. "Who was that?" "Oh, just an old friend of Frank's," I said, leaning against the doorframe. The smell of sawdust and old metal clung to my sweater. "Henry Chen. He was in town and wanted to see the old place." Mark's eyes narrowed for a second. He was suspicious, I could tell, but he was also arrogant. The thought that I, a forgetful old woman, could be making a move without him never even crossed his mind. He just grunted. All right. Don't stay too late, Ellie. You need your rest. The close call didn't scare me. It was like pouring gasoline on a tiny hidden fire inside my chest. The next morning, I didn't go to the store. I went to my little desk in the corner of my living room, the one overlooking the garden. I pulled out the big metal box from the back of the hall closet. The air filled with the faint, papery smell of history as I opened it. Tax returns going back 10 years. Profit and loss statements Frank and I had typed up on our old Smith Corona. My will. The trust documents. Everything that proved the store was mine, body and soul. I stacked them into neat piles on the floral blotter. I wasn't just organizing paper. I was gathering my armor. He thought my memory was failing. The truth was simpler. My memory wasn't failing, I whispered to the empty room. My tolerance was. That afternoon, I drove to a different bank, one on the other side of town where no one knew me. I rented a small safety deposit box. The clerk was a young woman with kind eyes. "Storing something important, ma'am?" she asked as she handed me the key. "My future," I said. Sliding that metal box into its cold, dark slot felt like closing a vault on my old life. A few days later, a thick manila envelope arrived by courier. I sat at my kitchen table, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the house. My hands trembled just a little as I tore it open. It was the official valuation from Mr. Chen. I unfolded the paper. There was a number at the bottom of the page. A big number. A strong, solid number that had more zeros than I was used to seeing. I stared at it for a long time, my coffee growing cold in its mug. This wasn't just money. It was security. It was respect. It was the freedom to walk away from my own life's work with my head held high. This number was the key to the rest of my life. I traced the digits with my finger, a slow smile spreading across my face. I felt a sense of calm I hadn't felt in months. The fear was gone. Just then, the phone on the wall rang, loud in the quiet kitchen. I picked it up. "Hello? Eleanor? It's Robert Chen," he said, his voice crisp and professional. "I have a very interested party. They've wanted this location for years. It's Miller's Hardware." Miller's Hardware. The words hung in the air. They were our biggest competitor, a family-run chain from the next county over. Frank and I had been in a friendly rivalry with old Mr. Miller for decades. Now his grandson was in charge. The irony was so thick I could have cut it with a knife. I remembered Mark, standing in the aisle with the plumbing fixtures, scoffing. "Miller's is stuck in the past," he'd said just last month. "No vision, no ambition." Mr. Chen was still talking. "They are prepared to make a very generous offer, Eleanor, and they want to move quickly and quietly." Quietly. That was the most beautiful word I had ever heard. Mark saw my store as an asset to be stripped. David Miller, the grandson, would see it as a legacy to continue. "Yes, Mr. Chen," I said, my voice clear and firm. "Please arrange a preliminary meeting." The next day at the store felt different. I walked the aisles with a new sense of purpose. This wasn't a retreat. It was a strategic withdrawal. Near the registers, Mark was talking to Gary, our oldest employee. Gary had started with us sweeping floors when he was 16. He was 62 now. "The fact is, Gary," Mark was saying, his voice full of false sympathy, "your hours are just not cost-effective anymore." I stopped beside the display of gardening gloves. Gary looked crushed, his shoulders slumped. I stepped forward. "Mark, can I have a word?" He followed me to the paint counter, an annoyed look on his face. "What is it, Ellie? I'm handling this." I looked him straight in the eye. My voice was quiet, but it didn't waver. "No, Gary is family. He stays." Mark opened his mouth, then closed it. He stared at me, truly seeing me for the first time in months. He saw not a sweet old lady, but the woman whose name was on the sign outside. He saw the boss. He sputtered for a moment, then just nodded, a flicker of shock in his eyes. "Fine," he mumbled, and walked away. It was a small victory, but it felt like winning a war. I met with David Miller at a small coffee shop on the other side of town. He was a man in his 50s, with kind eyes and a firm handshake. He didn't look like a corporate shark. He looked like his grandfather, who started their business the same year Frank and I did. He ordered a black coffee, same as me. The air smelled of roasted beans and cinnamon. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice quiet and respectful. "I've admired your store my whole life. My father used to say your husband Frank could find any bolt or screw ever made." I smiled. Frank knew his business. David got right to it. He made a generous, all-cash offer. It was more than the valuation Mr. Chen gave me. Then he said the words that settled everything in my heart. "And of course, we would want to retain all your current employees. Gary is a local legend." That was it. That was the thing that mattered most, besides my own freedom. The people who had been loyal to us for decades would be safe. I looked him in the eye, the hum of the espresso machine filling a small pause. "Mr. Miller," I said, "you have a deal." December 23rd was a cold, grey day. I sat in a warm, stuffy law office that smelled of old paper and lemon polish. My friend Carol was on my right, and my lawyer, Mr. Davies, was on my left. A thick stack of papers sat in front of me on the big mahogany desk, the final sale agreement. "Are you sure, Ellie?" Carol asked softly, her hand resting on my arm for just a second. I looked at her and nodded. I wasn't just sure. I was certain. I picked up the heavy black pen Mr. Davies offered me. My hand was steady. I signed my name, Eleanor Vance, on the last page. The scratch of the pen on the paper was the only sound in the room. It was done. The business I had built with my husband was no longer mine. The money would be in a secure account by morning. I held the signed papers in my hand, the crisp edges feeling sharp and final. All that was left was Christmas dinner. The smell of roasted turkey and pine needles filled my daughter Sarah's house. The whole family was there, gathered around the big dining table. Mark stood at the head of the table, a glass of wine in his hand and a smug smile on his face. He tapped his glass with a fork. The clinking sound made my teeth ache. "I have an announcement," he said, puffing out his chest. "So, as the man of this family, I've decided it's time to take over the hardware store. Ellie's retiring. It's for the best." He looked at me, his eyes full of fake pity. A profound calm settled over me, like a soft, heavy blanket. I felt nothing at all. I let him finish his little speech. I let the silence hang in the air for a perfect, terrible moment. Then, I slowly pushed my chair back and stood up. Every eye in the room was on me. The only sound was the crackle of the fire in the hearth. I cleared my throat, a small, quiet sound. "That's a lovely thought, Mark," I said, my voice as steady as a rock. "But it's impossible." Sarah looked confused. Mark's smile faltered. He opened his mouth to say something, but I kept going. "I sold the business yesterday," I announced to the stunned faces around the table. "To Miller's Hardware." The silence that followed was the most satisfying sound I have ever heard in my entire life. It was deep and absolute. a perfect void where all of Mark's hot air used to be. Mark's face went from smug red to a pasty, sick-looking white. Sarah just stared, her fork halfway to her mouth, completely frozen. My grandchildren looked back and forth between us, knowing something big had just happened. Mark finally found his voice, sputtering like an old engine. "You can't do that." I looked right at him. "It's already done." I picked up my cloth napkin from my lap, folded it neatly, and placed it on the table beside my plate of uneaten turkey. I looked around at my family, my gaze calm and final. "Merry Christmas, everyone," I said. And then I turned and walked out the front door. My phone started buzzing in my purse before I even got to my car. The screen lit up with Sarah's name. I felt the vibration against my hip, a frantic little tremor. I let it go to voicemail. I clicked the button on my keys, and my old Buick flashed its lights. The door opened with a familiar squeak. Inside, it smelled faintly of peppermint from the air freshener I'd clipped to the vent. I put my hands on the cold steering wheel and just sat there for a moment, listening to the quiet hum of the engine. It was the most peaceful sound in the world. When I pulled out of the driveway, I didn't look back at the house. I drove through the empty Christmas streets, past all the colored lights blinking on the houses. My phone buzzed again and again. I ignored it until I got home and took it out of my purse. A text message from Sarah was glowing on the screen, all in capital letters. "How could you do this to us?" I spent Christmas Day by myself, and it was the best one I'd had in a decade. I woke up when I wanted to. I made a pot of tea and sat in my favorite armchair with the old Afghan Frank's mother had knitted over my legs. The house was completely silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. I turned my phone off. I just pressed the button and watched the screen go dark. That silence was a gift I gave myself. I read a book I'd been meaning to get to for months and took a long nap in the afternoon. Later, there was a soft knock at the door. It was my neighbour, Shirley, holding a plate covered in foil. "Merry Christmas, Ellie," she said, handing it to me. I made too many gingerbread cookies. The cookies were still warm. That simple kindness, a plate of warm cookies from a friend, felt more like Christmas than anything that had happened the day before. The next day, I made my coffee and sat at the kitchen table for a long time before I finally picked up my phone. I turned it on. It buzzed and beeped for a solid minute. 37 missed calls, a dozen voicemails. I pressed the button to listen to the first one from Sarah. Her voice was thick with tears. "Mum, I don't understand," she sobbed. "The store was Dad's legacy. It was for us, for the family. How could you betray us like this?" Betray. The word hung in the air long after the message ended. My fingers felt steady as I typed a reply to her text message. It was only one sentence. "We can talk when you are ready to listen." I hit send, then put the phone face down on the counter. News gets around fast in a town our size, faster than the winter wind. On Wednesday morning, my phone rang, and it was Martha from my church coffee group. I almost didn't answer, but I knew she wasn't calling to yell at me. "Ellie, it's Martha," she said, her voice warm and a little conspiratorial. "I just heard what happened at Christmas dinner." I held my breath. "I just have one thing to say. Good for you." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "Oh, Martha," she went on. "Everyone at church has been saying for months how arrogant that Mark of hers has gotten, strutting around like he owned the place already. For the first time, I realized I wasn't the villain in this story. Not to the people who really knew me. That evening, just as the sun was setting, a car pulled into my driveway too fast. I looked through the blinds and saw it was Mark's big black truck. A moment later, a loud banging started on my front door. It wasn't a knock. It was a pounding, like he was trying to break the wood. I walked to the door but didn't open it. I didn't even touch the deadbolt. "Mark," I said, my voice calm and clear through the thick oak. "You are not welcome here. Please leave my property." The pounding stopped. There was silence for a second, and then his voice, full of rage, came roaring through the door. "You'll regret this, Ellie. I'll see you in court." I called Carol from my good armchair, the one with the floral print that Frank had always called the captain's chair. My hand trembled just a little as I dialed. I told her what Mark had shouted through the door. On the other end of the line, there was a pause. Then I heard a sound I didn't expect. A short, dry laugh. "Ellie, honey, let him try," she said, her voice as crisp as a new dollar bill. "He has no legal standing whatsoever. The business was in your name. He's just a spoiled child throwing a tantrum because you took his toy away." Relief washed over me so completely I felt my shoulders slump. "So he can't sue me?" "He can sue a ham sandwich if he wants to pay the legal fees," Carol said. "It doesn't mean he'll win. Don't you worry. You're safe." After we hung up, I sat in the quiet house. The only sound was the hum of the old refrigerator. I looked at my front door. It felt different now, thinner. I picked up the phone book, the real paper kind, and found the number for a 24-hour locksmith. An hour later, a nice young man was drilling out my old locks. The smell of hot metal filled the entryway. He handed me 2 shiny new keys. That night, the solid, final click of the new deadbolt was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. The next afternoon, the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw my daughter, Sarah, standing on the porch. She was alone. Her eyes were red and puffy, and she was hugging her arms around herself, even though the day wasn't cold. I hesitated for a moment, my hand on the new lock. Then I opened the door. She just stood there in the living room, looking lost among the furniture she'd grown up with. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked loudly in the silence. "Why, Mom?" she finally whispered. Her voice was hoarse. I didn't answer right away. I went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. I got out 2 of my good china cups, the ones with the little blue flowers. I made us both Earl Grey tea, just the way she likes it, with a slice of lemon. I brought the cups to the kitchen table and sat down across from her. From a folder on the counter, I pulled out the business plan I had printed from the office computer. I slid it across the smooth wooden table. "This is why, Sarah," I said, my voice quiet but steady. I pointed a finger at a line halfway down the page. "He wasn't going to run the store. He was going to gut it. He called it leveraging the old asset." Sarah stared at the papers. Her hand trembled as she reached out to touch the page, as if she couldn't believe the words were real. For a long time, the only sound was the soft clink of a spoon against a teacup. Then a single tear rolled down Sarah's cheek and splashed onto the page, right on the words, "Liquidate all inventory." She didn't make a sound, but her shoulders started to shake. "I didn't know," she choked out, her voice thick with tears. "Mum, I'm so sorry. I should have listened to you. I should have seen it." I pushed the box of tissues across the table toward her. I didn't say, "I told you so." There was no victory in my daughter's pain. I just sat there while she cried, my own hands wrapped around my warm teacup. The afternoon sun slanted through the window, lighting up the dust motes dancing in the air between us. When her crying finally quieted down, she looked at me, her face a mess of shame and sorrow. "What do we do now?" "You," I said softly, Do whatever you need to do for your own life. And I took a sip of my tea, will do the same for mine. It was the beginning of something new between us, but I knew it was built on the rubble of everything that had come before. A week later, I got a call from my bank. The money from the sale had cleared. I drove to the financial advisor's office downtown. It smelled of clean carpets and quiet confidence. A man named Mr. Gable, with a kind face and a firm handshake, led me to a big leather chair. He turned his computer monitor toward me. On the screen was a number. It was so large it didn't seem real. It was more than a number. It was a wall, a fortress, a future. "So, Eleanor," he said, his voice gentle, "what are your goals?" I thought of Frank, of the decades of hard work, of the dust on our boots and the calluses on our hands. "Security," I said, "and to take care of Frank's legacy for our grandchildren." We spent the next hour talking. I listened, I asked questions, and then I signed the papers. With the smooth roll of a heavy pen, I set up educational trusts for each of my grandkids. The money was locked down tight, safe from any get-rich-quick schemes. It was their grandfather's gift, and I was making sure it was delivered. I left that office feeling steady and calm. The money was safe. Now I had to think about where I would be safe. Back home at my kitchen table, I spread out a stack of glossy brochures. They showed pictures of smiling, grey-haired people playing tennis and laughing by a sparkling blue pool. Lakeside Villas, a 55-plus community. I traced the floor plan of a two-bedroom condo with a balcony. The smell of fresh ink and possibility filled my kitchen. The house Frank and I built was full of memories, but lately the bad ones were shouting over the good ones. The thought of leaving was sad, but the thought of a new front door with a new key was a powerful comfort. The mail clattered through the slot in the front door. Among the bills and catalogues was a thick, cream-coloured envelope. The return address was a law firm I didn't recognize. I slit it open with Frank's old silver letter opener. The letter was from Mark's lawyer. It was full of angry, important-sounding words like tortious interference and fiduciary duty, and all legal remedies will be pursued. I knew from what Carol had told me that it was just a dog barking behind a very strong fence. But seeing the threats in official black ink on heavy paper made a cold little knot tighten in my stomach. I forwarded the lawyer's letter to Carol. I didn't even bother to open the envelope, just put it inside a bigger one and dropped it in the mail. My hands didn't even shake. Carol called me that afternoon. "Ellie, I've seen it," she said. The sound of her turning a page crackled over the phone. "It's nothing, just a dog barking to hear its own echo." She told me her office sent back a one-sentence reply. I felt a strange, hollow pity for Mark. All that noise and anger. And for what? He was just a ghost now, rattling chains at a house he no longer had a key to. That afternoon I went downtown. I walked into the nice department store, the one I only ever window shopped at. I bought a beautiful camel-coloured coat, the kind with a soft, wide collar. I paid for it with my own money, from my own account. It felt heavier than wool and warmer than anything I had ever owned. I found it a few days later. A real estate agent showed me a condo in a building for people 55 and over, right on the lake. The air inside smelled of fresh paint and new carpets. From the balcony, you could see little sailboats skimming across the water. It had a small guest room and a kitchen with brand new, quiet appliances. "It's lovely," I told the agent. "I'll take it." She started to explain the process of making an offer, of mortgages and financing. I held up a hand. "I'll be making an all-cash offer," I said. The words felt simple and solid, like stones in my hand. Her eyebrows went up. The next day, she called to tell me my offer had been accepted. The power to just decide, to just make it happen, was a feeling I had almost forgotten. Sarah came over to help me pack up the old house. We sat on the floor of the living room, surrounded by cardboard boxes and stacks of newspapers. She pulled out an old photo album. The pages made a soft, crinkling sound. "Look, Mom," she said, pointing to a picture of me and Frank, covered in dirt, grinning in front of the half-finished frame of the store. "You were so young." We packed for hours, taping boxes and labeling them with a thick black marker. In the kitchen, over paper cups of lukewarm coffee, she finally said it. "Mark and I are in counselling," she whispered, not looking at me. I just nodded. I didn't offer advice or opinions. I just listened. Her life was her own to fix. My life, I realized as I taped another box shut, was finally mine again. A few days before the move, I drove past the store. I just needed to see it one last time. The big, familiar sign with my name on it was gone. In its place was a brand new, bright red one that said, "Miller's Hardware." It looked clean and professional. As I sat there, the automatic door slid open, and Gary, our oldest employee, came out to sweep the sidewalk. He saw my car, and his face broke into a big smile. He waved, a real, happy wave. He looked good. He looked like a man who wasn't worried about his job anymore. I felt a little ache in my chest, a sweet, sad memory of Frank's laughter echoing between those walls. But there was no regret. I had built it, and now it was safe. I put the car in drive and pulled away without looking back. Moving day was a beautiful, crisp autumn morning. The air smelled like wood smoke and dry leaves. My friends from church, Martha and a few others, showed up with boxes of donuts and a big thermos of coffee. My new neighbours from the condo building came down to help carry the lighter things. Sarah was there, a whirlwind of energy, directing the movers. "Be careful with that armchair," she told them. It was my father's favourite. There was so much life and laughter, the old house didn't feel sad at all. It felt like it was wishing me well. We were unloading the last few boxes at the new building. I was standing on my new balcony, just looking out at the calm water. Then I saw it. Mark's dark blue sedan pulled up across the street. He just parked there, at the curb, like a shadow. He didn't get out of the car. He just sat there in his fancy sedan, staring at the front door of my new building. The engine was off. He was just a silhouette behind the tinted glass. Sarah saw him from the window. Her shoulders went stiff. She put down the lamp she was carrying and walked outside without a word. I couldn't hear what they said, but I saw her posture. Her arms were crossed tight, her head shaking. The conversation was short and tense. After a few minutes, his car started with a low rumble and he drove away. Sarah came back inside, her face a little pale, but her jaw set. She took a deep breath, smelling the fresh paint and cardboard boxes. She looked at me, then at the half-assembled bookshelf. "All right," she said, her voice steady. "Let's get this bookshelf set up." My first night in the new condo, I didn't even try to unpack the kitchen. I ordered a pizza and sat on my new balcony with a paper plate on my lap and a glass of cheap red wine. The air coming off the lake was cool and smelled of clean water and damp earth. Below me, the lights of the other condos flickered on, one by one. I pulled a soft wool blanket over my legs, the one Frank had bought me for our last anniversary. It still smelled faintly of his closet, of cedar and old books. The moon made a silver path on the dark water. It was so quiet. No traffic noise, no shouting neighbours. Just the gentle hum of a world settling down for the night. I took a sip of wine and looked out at the peaceful darkness. I was home. The next week, I saw a notice on the community bulletin board for the gardening club. I put on my old sneakers and walked down to the community plots behind the tennis courts. A group of women, all about my age, were laughing and pulling weeds. A woman with a big sun hat and dirt on her nose looked up. "Here to join the fun?" she asked. Her name was Brenda. I spent the morning with my hands in the dirt, helping her thin out her tomato plants. We talked about books and the best brand of canned soup and our grandchildren. Nobody asked about my past or my family troubles. They just passed me a trowel and a bottle of water. My life was starting to feel bigger, not smaller. A few weeks later, Sarah called. Her voice sounded thin, like a wire stretched too tight. I was watering my new balcony gardenias, the sweet smell filling the air. "Mum," she said, "are you sitting down?" I sat. The plastic chair was warm from the afternoon sun. "What is it, honey?" There was a long pause, filled with a shaky breath. "I filed for divorce," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "I couldn't. I can't live with a man who had so little respect for you. For the woman who raised me, my heart ached for her. For the pain I knew she was feeling. "Oh, Sarah," I said softly, "I love you. I'm here for you. Whatever you need." She came over the next day. We sat at my small kitchen table, the one that wasn't haunted by memories of big, silent family dinners. I made her a cup of tea, and her hands trembled a little as she held the warm mug. She looked tired, but there was a new light in her eyes, a flicker of the strong girl I remembered. I knew I had to say the hardest thing. "Sarah, I will give you all my love and all my time," I told her, my voice gentle but firm. "But I will not finance your new life. You have to do that yourself." She looked at me, and I saw understanding in her face. Not anger, not disappointment, just a quiet acceptance. "I know, Mom," she said. "I wouldn't ask you to." She told me she'd already applied for a job at the local library. She was starting over. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with a hardware store. "I heard about Mark's business venture, the way you hear most things in a small town. My friend Martha mentioned it over coffee and donuts after the Sunday service." The smell of weak church coffee filled the fellowship hall. "Did you hear about that tech startup of Mark's?" she asked, stirring her cup with a little plastic stick. "The one he was so puffed up about?" I took a bite of my glazed donut. "I heard something about it." "Well, it went bust," she said, lowering her voice. "Lost every penny, they say. His investors are furious." She shook her head. Such a shame for Sarah. I just nodded and sipped my coffee. I felt nothing at all. No spark of satisfaction, no bitter joy. It was like hearing a weather report for a town I used to live in. His failure was his own, not my victory. My victory was the peace I felt right there, in that noisy room, with that terrible coffee. As I drove home, I thought about how much energy I had wasted worrying about him. It felt good to know my thoughts were finally my own again. The next spring, I took a trip to Italy. It was something Frank and I had always talked about, but never got around to. I sat in a sunny square in Rome, the warmth soaking into my bones. The air smelled of espresso and baking bread. The sound of church bells echoed off the old stone buildings. I bought a lemon gelato from a little cart, and it was so sharp and sweet it made my eyes water. I watched the children chase pigeons and felt a smile on my face that was completely my own. I wasn't a wife or a mother or a business owner. I was just Eleanor, a woman eating ice cream in the sun. I bought a stack of postcards. I sent one to each of my grandchildren with silly pictures of statues on them. I sent one to my friends at the gardening club. Then I picked one out for Sarah. It showed a beautiful, quiet garden. I held the pen over the paper for a long time, wondering what to say. Finally, I just wrote, "Thinking of you. You would love the flowers here. Love, Mom." When I got back, I called the local high school. I met with the guidance counselor, a kind man with a tired smile. His office smelled of old books and floor wax. "I'd like to set up a scholarship," I told him, my purse resting on my lap. "In my husband's name, for a student going into a trade school, carpentry, electrical, plumbing, something like that." "That's a wonderful thing to do, Eleanor," he said. Frank was a good man. A month later, he called to tell me they had chosen the first recipient. I went to a small awards night in the school library. A young woman with bright eyes and work boots came up to me. Her name was Maria. She wanted to be a carpenter. I won't let you down, Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice shaking just a little. "I know you won't," I said, patting her arm. "Frank would have been so proud." This felt right. This was a legacy that would build things for years to come. Sarah and I started a new tradition, Sunday brunch on my balcony. She would come over around 10, and I'd have coffee brewing and something baking in the oven. The smell of cinnamon filled my little condo. We'd sit and look out over the lake, the water sparkling in the morning light. "It's so peaceful here, Mom," she said one Sunday, sipping her coffee. "It is, isn't it?" I said. We talked about the book she was reading for her library science class, and the funny old man who came into the library every day to read the newspaper. We never talked about Mark. There was no need. His name had just faded away, like a bad dream you can't quite remember. Our relationship was finally quiet and strong, built on the present, not the past. Sarah did mention once that she'd seen Mark's mother in the grocery store. She said the woman looked right through her, like she was a stranger. It was a small, sad reminder that some wounds never quite fade. Twice a week, I started volunteering at the hospital. I would go to the long-term care wing and read to the patients. The wing had that clean, antiseptic smell, but it was a place of quiet kindness. I would sit by a resident's bed, the book open in my lap, and my voice would be a steady, calm sound in the room. One afternoon, I was reading to a woman named Mrs. Gable. She had her eyes closed, but I knew she was listening. When I finished the chapter, she reached out her thin, cool hand and patted my arm. "That was a nice part," she whispered. "Thank you, dear." I walked out of the hospital that evening as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. I had my condo, my garden, my friends, and my daughter. I had enough money, but I was learning that time and peace were the real currencies of life. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt truly wealthy. I wondered what small good thing tomorrow would bring. A few weeks later, a thick, cream-coloured envelope arrived in my little mailbox at the condo. It didn't have a return address, but I recognized the handwriting at once. It was Gary's. I brought it inside and set it on the kitchen counter, next to my morning cup of tea. The steam from the mug warmed my hands as I carefully slit the envelope open. The letter was short. Gary told me that David Miller had promoted him to store manager. He said he was using the same inventory system Frank and I had set up 30 years ago because it just worked best. "Thank you, Ellie," he wrote at the end. "Thank you for building a place that was worth saving." I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. I looked out my window at the calm water of the lake. Frank's legacy wasn't a building or a brand. It was the people he'd treated with respect. It was Gary, getting the job he'd earned a dozen times over. The next Tuesday, I was in the produce section at the grocery store, trying to decide between a cantaloupe and a honeydew. The air was chilly from the refrigerated cases, and a little speaker was playing a soft rock song from the 70s. Eleanor? Eleanor Vance? Is that you? I turned. It was Mrs. Gable, who used to come into the store every spring for her tomato seedlings. She patted my arm, her hand surprisingly strong. My goodness, you're looking wonderful, she said, her eyes crinkling. Retirement suits you. A small smile found its way to my lips. It felt genuine. Thank you, Doris, I said, patting her hand right back. But it's not retirement. It's a promotion. She looked confused for a second, then a slow grin spread across her face. She understood completely. My new financial advisor, a calm woman named Ms. Albright, had an office that smelled faintly of lemon polish. She slid a folder across her big, shiny desk toward me. The papers inside were crisp and important looking. Everything is performing better than projected, Eleanor, she said, her voice quiet and professional. The trusts for your grandchildren are fully funded. Your own portfolio is very healthy. I looked at the numbers on the page. They were just ink on paper, but they felt like a stone wall built around me and my family. Not a wall to keep people out, but one to keep the storms away. That's good news, I said, my voice steady. It is, she agreed. You are in a very secure position. I thought about that word, secure. It wasn't just about the money. It was the feeling of knowing that no one could ever make me feel small in my own life again. Sarah came over for our new Sunday brunch tradition. We sat on my little balcony, the sun warm on our faces, the sound of a distant lawnmower buzzing in the air. I had made blueberry scones, her favourite. She took a sip of her coffee and looked at me, her eyes brighter than I had seen them in years. Mum, she started, a little nervous. I've been thinking I'm going to go back to school. Oh? I said, keeping my voice neutral. I'm applying to the master's program for library science, she said, the words tumbling out now. I loved my job at the library and I want to do something that's just for me. I saw the woman I had raised, the girl who loved books, the smart, capable person who had gotten lost for a while. My quiet revenge wasn't about punishing Mark. It was about this. It was about freeing my daughter too. Tonight, I was sitting on my balcony as the sun went down. It painted the lake in soft shades of orange and pink. A warm breeze rustled the leaves of my potted gardenia, and the sweet smell filled the air. My teacup was warm in my hands. Sarah was on her way over for brunch tomorrow. A thank you note from the high school scholarship fund was sitting on my table. My life was quiet now. It was filled with small good things. I thought about the noise and anger of that Christmas dinner, and it felt like a story about someone else, a lifetime ago. I didn't just sell a hardware store. I bought back my life. And it was good.